Good morning. We'll be covering accounts receivable today, but instead of covering how to create invoices, we're covering invoices that have already been paid or deposits we've already made. So we'll be looking at payment and deposit corrections. Throughout the presentation, if you have questions, on the bottom right corner of your screen, there is a chat box. You're welcome to use that. I'll try and address any of the questions you have as we go through this. The presentation will be recorded. So once the recording is available, I'll email a link to the recording and a copy or a link to the slide deck I'm using for your records and something you can refer back to. Our agenda is to go through the different types of payments that we deal with in processing invoices. And we'll do an overview. I have a couple examples here, so we'll actually reverse a payment and talk about handling bounce checks. We'll go over types of deposits, including reversing a deposit, making any adjustments to an invoice that's outstanding, such as crediting it if we need to clear the invoice out of our aging reports. And then finally, we'll go through some of the reports. That will help us get along the way. During the presentation, I'll be going through some of the reports. At the end, if we have time, I'll make sure to get back to especially the customer aging report and the receipts register. So accounts receivables used to receive payments in Intacct, but we generate the invoices in the order entry application. Payments can be received in order entry, but it is a limited manner. It doesn't allow you to receive overpayments, process advances, or observe any unpaid invoices or outstanding adjustments that need to be addressed. Well, everything I'll be looking through will be basically accounts receivable for receiving payments. In February 2021, Intacct made enhancements to Intacct. So those of you who are using accounts receivable see the option to receive payments as new. The older method, called receive a payment, is no longer going to be included in any updates or improvements they make to Intacct. So that's being phased out. So the presentation today is only going to focus on the new method of receiving a payment and viewing payments through that fashion. And depending on the program setup for your program, you may be using order entry and accounts receivable a little bit differently than I'll be using it. Some of our users use it at the entity level, and some use it at the top level. And what that means in Intacct is up here at the top near Rosebud Sioux Tribe, our checkbooks are listed in an Intacct that's called an entity. And some programs will actually select whichever checkbook they're working on to switch to that entity rather than working at what's called the top level. So for today, I'm actually working on the entity level for our transaction. So however you're using Intacct, we're at the top or entity level, continue to use it that way. I'll be using it in this way just to get through today's presentation, mostly just so we can limit it to the stuff I want to display today. So let's talk about payments. In accounts receivable, that's where we receive a payment by applying it to an invoice. Or if we don't have an invoice, we receive what's called an adjustment. So when we're going through payments today, we're going to talk about circumstances that can arise that require us to correct the payment. The most common circumstance is when the amount of the payment received is entered incorrectly. Payments cannot be edited once they are posted to Intacct. This means that any corrections start with reversing a payment. So let's get into Intacct to talk about our payments. So I'm at the entity level, which is checkbook 35 for the one I'm using. And so when we talk about our payments, any payments we've posted, we can view multiple ways. The easiest way to view that is by going up to our menu to accounts receivable and to posted payments. And this will provide us a list of the payments we've received in Intacct. And it doesn't matter if they've been received directly to the bank or we've received them as an undeposited fund and then deposited them. The entire list of any type of payment we received, it can be viewed here. So if we were looking to correct a payment or address one of the payments we have, this would be the first place we're going to go to find the payment we're looking for. We can view these payments. The view option is on the screen. It gives us more detail about the payment, such as the receiving date, payment dates, the amount we've received, and there's an invoice tab that also tells us where we've applied the payment. So if we were going to make an adjustment to that payment, there's no edit option for us, so I can't come to the screen, edit, and change the amount from $1 to $2 or whatever the issue would be. We're going to have to reverse the payment. And by doing that, that's also going to make sure this invoice goes back to a status of being unpaid or partially paid if the payment didn't fully pay the invoice. So out here, this is one of the ways we can find our posted payments. The other way is through a report called Accounts Receivable Receipts Register. So under Accounts Receivable, under the little reports area, we have our registers and we have Receipts Register. Sales Register would give us a listing of all the invoices we've created. The Receipts Register is what we're looking for in identifying our payments. So if we click on Receipts, now we can tell Intacct the information we want. We have the current period defaults to the current month. So all the activity I created for us to look at today is this month, so I'm going to leave it at current month. You can change this period to any period of time you're looking for by either hitting the drop-down box and selecting a different period. I can change the as of date. If I changed it to 9/30/21 and it said current month, now that's how we view activity for September. Or you can override these two boxes and include a start and end date for a specific period of time you might be looking at. So we're using current month. The customer I used is called McTesterson. So I've selected that one because I want Intacct to return that one specifically. We'd want to use the checkbook that we're working on and the program for the activity. So we've got Test McTesterson, checkbook 35, the program for test company. And we can ask Intacct to return the details of these payments to us or only show us payments that are undeposited. So for those of you who see your undeposited balances, you can check mark this and only have those lists of the payments you haven't deposited yet. And then we can choose to sort this in a different way. We get receipt date or the amount. So once we've identified that stuff, we click View. And our payments have displayed on the screen. So I created two test invoices, so we have two payments here. Both received today. Here's the customer number, the method of the payment. So if I was working in the accounts receivable department in finance and ran this, this is likely going to say, I think is it record transfer? I think is the option that you guys use for stuff that's ACH to us. The transaction number is the check number or the transaction number you might use from the deposit document. Here's the amounts I've received. Here's the amounts I've applied. So we can see from the first line, I did not apply the full amount to an invoice. And when they were deposited, as well as links to the invoices that these were applied to. So I could further research that by clicking the link to an invoice. If I were going to reverse one, I also have an option to reverse from this report. So I don't only have to be at the posted payment screen, I can do it from this report as well, so I don't have to keep hopping screens. But we can see both of these are deposited, but we want to be careful about which payments we're going to reverse. When we're receiving payments, we have an option to choose an account type as bank or undeposited funds account. So for those of you who attended the training about receiving payments, or are currently doing that, we're taught to use the undeposited funds account and not to post directly to the bank. This allows us to receive multiple payments that will only get included as one transaction at the bank. When we take our deposits to the bank doesn't list every single deposit as an individual entry on our bank statement. It lists it as one subtotal. So by using undeposited funds, this allows us to match the bank record by including all of our separate deposits as one deposit entry in our Intacct records. If we use bank, this posts directly to the bank and would create an individual record for each time we've done that. So here at our posted payment screen, there's a column that actually tells us the deposit status for these two payments I've collected. One says bank. So one I've collected directly to the bank account rather than going through undeposited funds. And one of them says it was deposited, meaning I created an undeposited fund and then deposited it. On the other screen, I have our general ledger account of what's happening with all these activity we've created. The accounts receivable account is where our initial entries are going to record the invoices I've created. So we can see these two lines with invoice numbers 38402, 38403, the amounts of the invoice. The offset entry to the receivable is the revenue account. We can see those invoices and I've recorded my revenue. Once we receive payment to post against this, it's going to reduce the accounts receivable balance by $1 as a missed payment. But the payment I received was actually $1.50. So we can now see I had an overpayment of 50 cents. And those amounts go to our undeposited funds. And once I create the deposit, that gets put into the cash account, increasing the cash balance by that $1.50. So when I reverse this payment, a lot of these balances are going to change, right? Our cash is going to go back. It's going to be reduced by this $1.50. Our our undeposited funds account is going to increase. We're going to get another balance there because those amounts are going to leave the undeposited funds. Our accounts receivable balance for that invoice is going to go up. And our balance that's sitting here as an overpayment will go away. But because this thing is deposited, the first thing we have to do actually is reverse the deposit itself and not the payment. So under accounts receivable, there is a deposit screen. Here we can see the entry for the deposit. If I view the deposit slip itself, it tells me what comprised that deposit. And so it's $1.50. Check number test 123. And that was posted today. So if I'm going to reverse this payment, the first thing I have to do is reverse the deposit. So by choosing deposit to reverse, a new box pops up and we get to date the reversal of this deposit, which we would use the same date as the bank transaction, which happens to be today. And then we can add a brief memo explaining why we're reversing this amount. So if we had an error in our payment, it shouldn't have been $1.50. It was a $1 invoice. They paid us $1. We had a typo. Maybe I'm going to say that correcting the amount that was received. If we had a check that was included in the deposit that should not have been, we're correcting the deposit total. That might be our reason. So whatever the reason fits for this, we're going to include a brief thing so that it's recorded for our research in the future, and other users can see that as well. And we hit submit. When that's done, there's no approval process. So whatever transaction you join here for reversal, whatever date you use, whatever memo we put in there, that's it. It's final. We can't edit that. We can't delete it. Anytime we're working with cash and Intacct, these transactions become uneditable and they cannot be deleted. So now we can see my deposit now says it's reversed, and a new entry was created saying there's a reversal. We come back to our general ledger report and we update this. A couple of things will have happened to the report. Number one, here's that voided deposit slip. So $1.50's come out of our cash total. Here's undeposited funds, and our voided slip here has put that $1.50 back into undeposited funds, so we have a $1.50 balance. So we voided the deposit, but did we void the payment yet? Not yet. We've only voided the deposit. Now the payment is free to be accessed and voided. So we'll leave the deposit screen and go back to our posted payments. Our $1.50, the status has gone from deposited back to undeposited. So we're going to go ahead and reverse this entry, and basically the same thing as reversing the deposit. We're going to use the same day the payment was posted, which happens to be today, and we'll use the memo for training. So now that $1.50 now says it's reversed, and a new entry was created that's the reversal to that one. And when we come back to our general ledger report, we're going to see some changes at accounts receivable and our overpayments. So the first account balance that changes is undeposited funds. That's now to $0 because we've voided the payment that was sitting as an undeposited fund. Our accounts receivable balance has increased because of the voided invoice. And our overpayments balance has gone away because the payment has no longer been overpaid. It's been voided. So now that we've made that correction, if the amount was supposed to be $1, we can now go back into our receiving a payment and posting the payment now with the corrected amount. All right, do we have any questions about reversing a deposit into payment? All right. And the same concept it would work for this payment. This one's posted directly to the bank. So if we reverse this payment, we don't have to reverse a deposit because this is directly there, so there's no deposit we have to find. And that's the only step we would have to take. So if we needed this payment to be included with that deposit because we want the bank entry for our bank reconciliation to actually show one line instead of multiple different ones for Lori to match to when it's bank rec time, then we need to reverse this deposit and receive the payment again, but this time posting it to undeposited funds. And the undeposited funds basically lets us deposit multiple payments and grouping them as one deposit slip. And that's the whole point of that one. But let's reverse this payment from our receipts register report. We're going back to accounts receivable under reports, registers, and receipts. We're using the current month. And when the report's running, we still get information about the one that was reversed. So that's still there as a record, which is great for us to see. We know we've taken care of business for that one. And more importantly, now what we're concerned with is the $2 payment on a different invoice. We can reverse that from here. If we weren't sure what the issue was with this, we could also go look up the invoice. So I can click on the invoice link. It's going to open up a new screen for us, and it's going to take us to invoice information. Here's that invoice number. Here's the day it was due. This is the amount that was due and the amount that was paid. So we have that for us to refer to. I can go back to order entry and to the workflow that was used. So for this one, I used AR invoice. For some of you, depending on what you're using, TUC staff use the TOC workflow. The daycare uses childcare. Adult corrections, Koya, Kayani, the TED loan program. IT uses the sales invoice here for IT sales invoice. We have insurance premiums, insurance claims. And our program monitors actually use the drawdown workflow, and the accounts receivable staff here use that to find payments to pay. Here's our list of activity we've created. Here's the latest invoice for Test McTesterson. Its status is paid. Subtotal is $2. Nothing is due. This is the account that still has a payment applied that hasn't been reversed. Here's the first invoice that was created. It says it's open with $1 due. So if we look at that first one, we can actually see payment details of when the payment was applied when it got reversed. So if we wanted to know why it still says open, we have our answer. We can go through receiving a payment for this if we needed to. Here's the one that's paid, and we can view its history, and we can see the payment that was applied, check number train 456. From this screen, we cannot reverse a payment. If we view the payment information, from here we can't reverse the payment either. We can just get more information. So we're only going to be able to reverse the payment from one of two screens, posted payments or the receipts register. So we're going back to our receipts register. We're going to go to posted payments. And we're going to reverse this payment. Using the same day the transaction was posted to. And we have our memo. So now on the posted payment screen, there's no payments that are active. Everything says reversed or reversal. We go to where we created our invoice. That status has now gone to open. It's no longer paid. If we view the history tab for this invoice, we can see payment details of the $2 payment being applied and it being taken off. And over here on our general ledger report, which is growing bigger and bigger with each reversal, when I refresh this report, we can see all the $2 entries. Here's when we posted the payment. Here's when I reversed it. Here's when the invoice was created. Here's when it was paid. And now here's when that payment was reversed. So some pretty easy entries have happened. We've affected cash. We've affected accounts receivable. We know our actions have resulted in the invoices going back to being unpaid. So we reverse the payment. We know we still have to collect on this invoice in the future. If we had made an error in receiving the payment, like for this $1 payment, now I can go back to paying this invoice and posting the correct amount. And like in this one here, if we posted directly to the bank instead of to undeposited funds, now I have to receive the payment again using undeposited funds. Reversing a payment can't be undone. So when we reverse a payment or a deposit, none of that can be undone. We have to create the entry again. All right. Any questions about payment reversals or deposit reversals? Okay, we're going to look at a report called customer aging. So we're going to accounts receivable, customer aging, and then to report. If you're managing a program or working in a program where you're using accounts receivable, this is a report you should be visiting frequently to view what's happening with your outstanding invoices. So the aging period, you can just leave it at the default. We're going to get a return of any invoice that's not past due, from nothing to 0 days. Stuff that's 1 to 31 days past due, 31 to 60, 61 to 90, 91 plus. We're going to use the report as of today. If we were using this to measure our activity through fiscal year 21, I would change the date to 9/30/21, but we're going to use it today. We're basing this on the invoice date. We can choose a range of customers or specific customer. So we're looking up this customer I have and my program and checkbook. So for all of our users, program and checkbook is the minimum required information you're going to have to put to get any information out of these reports. And then we can choose more stuff. How do we want to sort this? Is it by customer ID, their name, their amounts, posting dates? So like KINI, Koya, you're going to have a lot of customers that on your list when you run this report. You know, customer name might make more sense. It'd be easier to find someone alphabetically rather than in order by customer ID. Do we want detail or summary information? I have it on summary. Let's leave it at that for the moment. Do we want to include people with 0 balances? So you can choose yes if you wanted all of that information rather than just the people who owe you. So let's view this report. And this is going to tell us that Tess McTesterson has $3 in this column in the 0 overdue range. So that one's not currently past due. If you had amounts here, then we would know that your customers might owe you who could be 1 to 30 days over the invoice due date, 31 to 60, and so forth. Obviously, we'd be focusing on the later dates to make a determination why those aren't being paid or to reach out to those customers to make sure they know that their amounts are due. If I include detail rather than summary, it's actually then going to detail to me each of the invoices that are due. And if they were past due, the days aged would include the number of days it's been since we've billed them and they haven't paid. In this circumstance, with these invoices, if the payments weren't necessary, we're going to clear these invoices. We don't want the customer to pay us. We're going to have to make adjustments to these balances. Maybe we've billed them and now they're not using the product. If we're IT, they haven't received the printer or the copier, the laptop, whatever it is that we're selling. If a business has bought ad space from one of our radio programs and we're not going to run the advertisements anymore, we certainly don't want to continue to bill the customer. But what we can't do is we can't delete the invoice either. So as the best accounting practice, what we're going to have to do is make an adjustment to those invoices rather than editing them or deleting them. We want to create an audit trail of our activity for future records. And so what we're going to have to do is submit an adjustment for this invoice. So I'm going to make note of what these invoice numbers are. And we no longer want these things on our aging reports. We don't want them to show on our general ledger report as due to us. If we work in the finance office and we see this amount and we know it's not going to be paid, we'd be inclined to want to do a journal entry, which if we do, would clear the amount, but it fixes nothing in accounts receivable. Those amounts still sit due to us. So what we're going to do is we're going to accounts receivable and we're going to add adjustments. So I'm going to click the plus sign next to an adjustment. And what we can do here now is similar to purchasing. We're going to include some information that we want to record for our adjustment. Today's date, who the customer is. Credit memos will decrease their balances. Debit memos will increase their balances. So we're going to issue a credit memo to close out one of these invoices. We're going to reference the invoice. So we'll use this one. If there was an attachment we needed to have, so we might have, if we're selling radio ad space and there's a reason this is happening, we might have that document here, whether it's an email from your customer canceling the quote for the ad space, that kind of stuff. Something that's going to support why we're saying this bill's not going to be paid. And so now we would use the account number, which is the revenue account number used on the invoice. The same thing for the item number, the one used on the invoice. The amount of the invoice the amount of credit we're going to issue to reduce the invoice. And our program, funding source, and checkbook. Once these are ready, we can go ahead and post this. So it's telling us our record was created successfully. So now when I go to receive a payment, we're using our undeposited funds account. Here's our customer. And we're going to select the dollar invoice we're crediting. And so what we can see on screen here is that there's a column that says credits available, and it means $1 is ready to apply. By creating the adjustment, Intacct does not automatically apply it to the invoice. So once we've created the adjustment, whether it's through credit adjustments or a credit memo, our next step that we have to finalize is actually applying that to the invoice. If we do not apply it on our aging report, it will continue to sit there showing that that amount's not applied and that invoice is still due. Even though on our general ledger report, I'm going to cut out all the other stuff and we'll look at the receivables account. Our general ledger report would reduce by that $1. But what we're concerned with is we have to get this invoice off of our aging report. I want to show the aging report before I apply the credit. That $1 remains due to us, and now we've started a countdown on our adjustment for the $1 credit. So those would continue to stay there, even though we've made the adjustment and our general ledger is squared away for this. We have to go and apply this credit to get rid of that invoice, get it off of our books, get it out of our subledger for accounts receivable. So we're going to receive that credit similar to a payment. We're going to receive a payment, undeposited funds. Using our customer, we'll select our invoice. So we have the $1 invoice. And then we can add and close this box. If I click on this amount, if there were multiple credits, we'd have a list of that there. So especially if you work in accounts receivable here, and there's drawdowns, you're going to see multiple credits there. But we're going to select the one we want to use. And so the line now says the credits available is nothing, credits to apply is 1, the amount due is 1, outstanding amount now is to 0. So there's a question about if you don't click the plus sign on adjustment. Yeah, there's a minor difference. We'll show that after we post this. So our transaction's been successfully saved. We're going to go back to our customer aging report. Now those entries are gone. So we've fully completed addressing the issues with either the payments or the invoice by reversing those misapplied payments and by crediting or using a credit adjustment to eliminate the invoice without affecting our cash. The adjustments do not have any effect on cash. It's just taking out the revenue and taking out the receivable. If we went to create an adjustment, rather than clicking on the plus sign, we clicked on adjustments, it takes us a list to what those are. So if we've ever done any historically, we would see them here. And then we can add just by clicking the add button. Kind of like in Intacct when we're at purchasing, if we wanted to create a purchase requisition, we could click the plus sign, or if we click the text, it just takes us a list to all the purchase requisitions we've done that we can research those and then go to adding one once we're ready to do that. So either use the plus sign or you can click the text itself. And regardless of the reason that we're reversing a payment, the step is the same for every single type of payment that we need to address. If we have a bounce check, one of the businesses or a customer has issued a bounce check to us, we find this out down, probably a couple weeks down the road when the bank notifies us. The first thing we're going to do is make that determination. Was that check received directly to the bank? By choosing account type bank, or was it received as an undeposited fund and then included as part of a deposit? If it's included as part of a deposit, we're going to reverse the deposit, and then we can address the payment or payments we need to correct. So whether that's a bounce check, we recorded the wrong amount, we've had a typo, it was $110 and we accidentally entered $101. No matter what the reason is, the same steps are taken for any of these payments to correct. Since we cannot edit a payment, we cannot delete a payment. For any invoices that we're going to issue credits for, we're going to use a credit adjustment. Back to using Koya or KNI as an example. I don't remember if it was earlier this year or at the end of last year, there was damage to one of the radio towers. So advertisements and the programs weren't able to run during all of the times throughout the day. So there was credits being issued or discounts to some of the rates. So if we billed someone $100 and that's 20 ads or something, and for some reason we can only run 15 of those 20 ads, we're going to issue a credit to that invoice. That's as easy as coming to our adjustment screen and issuing that credit for that invoice so we can apply and reduce the invoice amount that's due. So now we can send them an updated invoice that actually says your amount has changed from $100 due to $90 due because there was a $10 credit for not running the advertisements. All right, I think I've gone through the reports I needed to go through, which is customer aging, the receipts register, and the list view reports, like looking at posted payments. You can create custom views here just like you do at purchasing. So if we only wanted to see these for specific customers or deposit statuses as undeposited, bank, deposited, we could do that too. You know, like for example, today I created one that only showed activity that happened this month. So activity from previous trainings didn't list on the page. That's totally up to you by using the Manage Views option to create a new one. On the website I have, ljstraining.info, or on my YouTube page, LJ Moran, there is video specific to creating these custom views. And the steps taken there work on any screen that you see a list of activity. As a bonus report before we finish, under registers we have sales. So receipts are the payments we've received. Sales are our invoices, our actual sales. We'll use current month through today. My specific customer. Do we need to see transaction details, payment details, credit details? So we could add all of that stuff if we wanted to. And just like those other reports we've seen here in accounts receivable, we can sort by certain criteria, given a bunch of different options, and we can group this stuff by different criteria. When we view the report based on the information I've said this month for Tess McTesterson, now we can see those things. We see the adjustment as its own entry. We can see that it's been applied since it has an amount in the amount paid column and in the method applied credit. We see the two different invoices, the general ledger accounts used to record our revenue, the amounts that were applied, so we can see the adjustment, the initial check, the reversal of the check, and the same thing here on the information below. Now this one, the invoice itself hasn't been reversed yet. So it's still sitting there as amount paid $0 and the amount created for that invoice still sitting at $2. If not, thank you everyone for your time today. I'll email this stuff out when it's as soon as it's ready. Have a good rest of the day.